To the Wealthy Healthy Life podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me on your podcast.
Yes, I'm so happy that you're joining. Listeners, Allison is a nutritional therapist and she focuses a lot of her work on helping women in that menopause phase, which I think a lot of the listeners can listen or can relate to. I know I personally can. I'm kind of in that perimenopause phase myself and have been trying to figure out like why has everything I've done in the past not working now, right? So I think a lot of ladies can relate. But before we kind of dive into your work and some of the things you see, I'd love for you to share with the audience just kind of what led you to this work and a little bit about your journey along the way.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. Well, a short summary of my journey was I actually, when I was a teenager, I suffered from very bad acne. And it's hard enough, isn't it, being a teenager without having a face full of acne? And that, even at that age, that's what really stimulated my interest in hormones, because I realized that I didn't just want to take medication. I wanted to understand why this was happening. So I actually read a fair bit and found out what I could and changed my diet and certain things in my lifestyle and saw a big change in my skin. And that led me to, because I am actually an esthetician as well, a beauty therapist. That initially is what I trained to be, but I very soon came to realize with my clients that you can't just work on the outside, you also have to work on the inside with nutrition. And because of my interest in hormones, that led me to working with women, perimenopause, menopause, because there's so many things that start going on in your body, not just your skin. It really affects everything. And I also remember seeing like my mother and her close friends and all the female members in the family going through menopause, and they were really suffering. And I mean, it's getting better, but
Mhm.
it certainly isn't spoken about enough. And it can be a really tough time for some women with all the hormonal changes. So that's really what led me into nutritional therapies, is to because it's such a powerful thing. What we eat has such a huge effect on how we feel. And when you come into perimenopause, you really have to start looking after yourself a little bit better
Mhm.
with nutrition, with lifestyle, and everything like that. So that's a short summary of my my
Yeah.
history.
Well, thank you for sharing, and I think it's admirable that even as a teenager, like, I think it probably just speaks to the fact that, like, you have a genuine interest in this
Mm.
topic because I don't know how many teenagers, even if they're struggling with acne, would actually do the research and the work to change the diet. Like, I have a 17-year-old son, and luckily he doesn't have bad acne, but he does have stomach issues sometimes, and there's certain foods that we know trigger that, and he will still eat those foods sometimes, like knowing that what the outcome will be. So I think as a teenager, that's great that you were willing to put that much effort into it at a young age because you don't see that a lot these days. But
No,
um,
you don't. I
yeah,
think another thing was that my mother was a chef, was a professional chef, and when I was growing up, everything revolved very much around fresh products, food. Food was so nourishing. I think that's probably one of the reasons as a teenager, because I agree totally with what you're saying. It's quite unusual that I had kind of put that two and two together and realized that food has such an impact on your well-being and your skin health. So yeah.
yeah. Oh, that's great. It's great to grow up with that. Yeah, and I agree too with you saying about menopause being, especially when we watched like our parents, our moms going through it, or our aunts or somebody, it was really like a hush hush thing. Nobody really talked about it. It was kind of taboo, which is sad because I think it did lend itself to a lot of kind of like isolation and feeling like you couldn't ask, like, is this normal or why do I feel this way? And to your point, I do think it's getting a lot better. I think we have a long ways to go still, but I think like people like yourself, as having this podcast, I've spoken with other coaches, physicians, people that are really focused on it. I think that they are trying to be more vocal about it and get more attention on it. So I'm hopeful for the generations below us that this will not be nearly as a like secretive, or and also not even just like, oh, we don't talk about it, but like looked at like not a good thing, right? Like, oh, she's in menopause. Like you almost feel like that's, you're kind of discarded after that as a woman, and that does not have to be the case. So,
No, there is, like you say, there's still a lot of work to be done, and there has been in Europe where I live. There's been a bit of a menopause revolution going on, particularly in the United Kingdom, because a lot of celebrities have got behind it and done television shows and everything. So women have really got behind it and said that's enough. We want help, we want support. But I mean, it isn't like that in there's many countries where it still is not spoken about, and women are really suffering, and they don't necessarily understand what's going on because they haven't got the knowledge. No one talks about it. So it's so important to get that message out there to help women. And I was actually talking about menopause way before anybody else was, because now it's everyone's talking about
yeah.
it. I was there beating the drum years ago trying to get through to people. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. Okay, so let's dive into what are some of the symptoms or issues that you're seeing maybe women come to you with, or even if even not just that, but just like in general, if someone's like, I don't know what's going on, but like you could list off some symptoms and issues they might be having that they might be like, oh, okay, maybe this is what's happening.
Yeah, I work with many different women in many different stages of menopause, because there are, I think it's important maybe just to explain the different stages first, because
Yeah.
menopause is a transition and it's very individual for every woman. The first phase, as we've already mentioned, is called perimenopause. On average, that happens at the age of 45. And this is where things start to become unbalanced. Your hormones can be all over the place. Estrogen can actually be quite dominant in perimenopause. You're still fertile, you can still get pregnant, you still have your monthly period, but this transition is starting, and perimenopause can go on for many years. And roughly, again, on average, at the age of 51, we go into what we call the menopause. And really, what the menopause is, it's when you haven't had menstruation for a year consecutively, then you're actually in menopause. And all the time after that is what we call postmenopause. And that's the rest of a woman's life, where you no longer have ovarian function, you can no longer get pregnant. Your body is a very small amount, but your body isn't producing estrogen and progesterone anymore, and that comes with it, a lot of different health issues, because of the lack of hormones. But in answer to your question, when I work with clients, the type of, I mean, it's such a wide array of different symptoms. And perimenopause, it kind of just creeps up on you. And I think what's quite interesting with the clients I work with, that, they come to me with a lot of different symptoms. It could be like exhaustion, brain fog, anxiety, but they still haven't kind of put the pieces together and thought that they might be in perimenopause. And
Mhm.
when you say to them, this sounds very much like you could be in perimenopause, and they'll go, no, 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 I'm too young, or that isn't me. So I think we don't think about that. We tend to put it down to life in
Mhm.
general, the stresses of everyday life. But some of the main symptoms are like the hot flashes. That's like a classic uh, menopause symptom. A weight gain around the middle, specifically around the tummy area, that can creep up on you. Changes in your hair can become thinner. You can suddenly, as we were talking about, you can actually get acne in perimenopause. Things like itchy skin, digestive changes, and then the mental side of it, the emotional side. You can find yourself, feeling very emotional or very irritated much quicker, and not being able to remember things and focus. And I mean, some women do really suffer from depression
Mhm.
during menopause, and it all, well, the majority of it stems from the fact that we need our hormones, we need estrogen and we need progesterone and testosterone, amongst other hormones for, we need them for virtually every bodily function. So when these hormones aren't being produced anymore, you start getting all these symptoms.
Mhm. No, that makes a lot of sense, and I know I can certainly relate to some of the symptoms that you're mentioning, and I think that you're right, though. I think a lot of women are like, "What is going on?" And they're not really one, I think we don't want to maybe admit that we're maybe
Mm.
heading to that road, right? Like, perimenopause, menopause, because I think for me, growing up, I'm like, "Oh, that means you're getting old," right?
Yeah.
Like, and I'm not saying that's I don't necessarily feel that way now, but I'm just saying, like, I think it does have that stigma attached to it, right? Where we're like, "Oh, that means you're getting old or you're not as vital," and those sort of
Mm.
things. And then also the symptoms kinda come and go. So I feel like probably because your hormones are not they're probably doing this, right? Like one minute they might be doing well and then the next not. And so I feel like a lot of it too is you're like, well, maybe not because I haven't had a hot flash in weeks, but then all of a sudden you do again, or different things like that. And that's why it's important to kind of start talking about it. So I think women understand what the symptoms are and that they're not alone, that this is normal, but that there's also things you can do to help mitigate that. Whether that be looking at hormone replacement or first trying some actual lifestyle adjustments like nutrition and things like that.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. It just creeps up, and it's very true what you were saying. You not every it's so individual. Some women don't have any hot flashes at all. They might just experience like brain fog. And some women may really suffer from hot flashes and night sweats and not being able to sleep and all of those things. So it's a very individual thing, but it isn't particularly in perimenopause. Your hormones could be all over the place. So you might have a week where you experience these symptoms, and then it maybe can go like 3 or 4 weeks where you don't experience any, and then all of a sudden they come back. So
Yeah.
it's a very slow transition.
Yeah, I think I personally have experienced that. Like sometimes I feel really good and I'm like, okay, I think I've figured this out. And then I'm like, okay, well, maybe not. So um, okay, so let's talk a little bit about what is some of the work that you do with people when they come to you and they're having these symptoms? What does that look like? Do you want them to get like lab tests done first, or are there things that people listening can do today to start making changes and see if that helps them to feel better, whether that's nutrition, exercise, those sorts of things?
When I work with clients, I work very individually. I mean, I do have group programs as well, but if I work individually with clients, we really I get a full health history first. I actually work with the functional medicine model where you're looking at the whole person, not just at the symptom, and then tailoring, nutrition, lifestyle, testing, maybe supplementation to that person, very, very individually, because everyone's goals are different, aren't they? And health
Mhm,
concerns. As far as testing goes, there is a test called the Dutch test, which is a very a great test, a hormone test, which shows you, your levels of hormones. It can be quite tricky doing testing when women are in perimenopause and menopause because particularly in perimenopause, as we said, because the hormones are all over the place. So it's very good to know exactly and tell the client when to do the test
mhm,
so they know. But if any listeners are interested in that, then you would need to work with a professional to get that done. But that shows you your levels of hormones and not just estrogen and progesterone. It shows your stress hormones and things like that as well. So it's actually a very useful test if clients want to do that. I
mhm,
mean, if a client is in menopause and isn't having ovulation anymore, it I sometimes do hormone testing, but it's kind of what I always think, why am I doing this test? What do I want to get from it? Because the testing, they are quite, expensive. There's
mhm,
got to be a reason to do it. And if someone's not menstruating anymore, that their estrogen and progesterone levels are going to be very low unless they're taking hormone replacement therapy.
mhm,
So I very much work with many different areas: nutrition, lifestyle, and also mindset with my clients. And when it comes to nutrition, I'm a big believer in keeping things simple. It doesn't have to be difficult to eat healthy. And one thing that we see, particularly in menopausal women, is that we need to really work on blood sugar balance because, again, because of the lack of hormones, this has a huge effect on our metabolism, on our metabolic health, blood sugar levels, insulin resistance. We see this in menopausal women much more. So, for example, when you're eating, think one thing that would make a huge difference, and I know this isn't easy, but is to try to reduce processed foods from your diet. um, it's very difficult. We live in a very toxic food environment, and these foods are everywhere, aren't they? I mean, they're everywhere. So I do really appreciate that it's difficult, but packaged foods, that's what I'm talking about. You really want to be eating whole foods, a food that doesn't come with a list of 10, 20 ingredients. Something like a piece of broccoli, you know what it is. But all these processed foods contain so much sugar. They've got a lot of unhealthy fats in them. They're just not good for us. And we're seeing now in the health of the world that, you know, okay, it's not just ultra processed foods, but that's one of the factors that really is damaging our health. And when we come into menopause, as I said earlier, we have to look after ourselves a bit better. And having these foods that contain sugar, that have a negative effect on your blood sugar, will just make you feel worse. There's research to say having a high sugar diet really affects menopausal symptoms like hot flashes, and it causes weight gain. It has a knock-on effect.
Mhm.
So really, when you look at your plate, you want to be eating enough protein. That we tend not to eat enough protein as women, and we need even more protein when we get older because we tend to lose muscle mass. Roughly about a palm size of protein with every meal. And then looking at carbohydrates, it's very beneficial if you get the majority of your carbohydrates from vegetables. Most people don't think of vegetables as carbohydrates, but they actually are.
Mhm.
So if you've got your protein on your plate, you fill up half your plate with vegetables, salads, beans, nuts and seeds, all of those things. And then, make sure that you're getting your healthy fats like avocado, olive oil, nuts and seeds, coconut oil, butter, all of those things. It's really what I say, cutting out the white foods, the refined carbohydrates like white rice, white pasta, all the cakes, biscuits, all of those things, and go for brown, fiber rich foods, because fiber is another thing that we don't tend to eat enough of as
Mm.
women. And we need fiber to detoxify estrogen from our bodies, it's particularly in perimenopause where you can be estrogen dominant. Things like broccoli, cruciferous vegetables are wonderful for women. Cauliflower, cabbage, broccoli, they really help the elimination process of estrogens from the body. And then drinking water. I know that sounds very basic, but do we drink enough water if we're really honest with ourselves? I'm sure there's many people that do, but it's something that you forget about.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, like you said, it doesn't have to be complicated. We make things complicated a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Um, but to your point also, it's not necessarily easy because we are inundated with all of these processed foods or ultra processed foods all around us. And they, I try to tell people like they are addictive. So don't don't use that as an excuse, but also like understand that when you're like, I really want to not eat this, but you keep going back to it, there's a reason for that. The foods are designed to have you keep coming back, and you have to give yourself a window of time to kind of break that cycle. Like it doesn't just happen. We don't just we know what we should do, what we should eat. Maybe we know we need to eat healthier, but it's if we did what we knew we should do, we'd all be healthy, right? So
Yeah, that's
it'd be a lot easier. So like give yourself a little bit of time to adjust to the new diet, slowly phase stuff out, and then as you start feeling better, that's probably motivation to keep going and to do better over time.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is difficult. I mean, they're everywhere, aren't they? You have to be, like you say, you have to be quite determined initially because it is addictive. Your brain is very clever and it wants that quick fix of, sugar and fat, and it will lead you towards, the when you go shopping in the grocery store, your brain, especially if you're hungry, never go shopping when you're hungry. That's
Yeah.
that's lethal. Because you'll end up in the carbohydrate aisle, won't you, with all the crisps and chips and biscuits and everything there. So
Yeah.
you have to be quite strict with yourself initially. And then one really handy hint is that don't have those foods in your house, because if you haven't got them there, it's very unlikely that you'll get in your car and drive to the grocery store to buy them. So don't have your trigger foods in the house from the
Right.
beginning.
I think that's a great point, and it's easy, and I don't think we maybe overestimate our willpower ability sometimes, but you're exactly right. Like if we're just coming off the holidays with Christmas and everything, and if all the sweet stuff or the candy or the cakes or whatever are laying around and you walk past it, and every time you walk past it, you get yourself a little something that adds up a lot over time. Whereas if you just don't have it there, you're exactly right. Like you might go and look and be like, oh, I wish I had a cookie, candy, whatever, but you're not probably going to go drive and get it. So uh,
No.
it's an easy trick, but like I said, I think we overestimate our willpower sometime.
Yeah, we do.
So yeah. So with working with some women, do you feel like, you start with diet first then and kinda get them onboarded with this new way of eating, and over time, they start feeling better, and then what are some of the other things that you might have them do to help with any of the symptoms as well?
Yeah, diet I tend to do first, but it does depend on the client, because the one other major thing that is could be very impactful is stress management.
Mm.
And I see that so much in my clients, because the majority of women that come to me are exhausted, they're overwhelmed, they don't know what to do, they just feel terrible. And a lot of that comes from chronic stress,
Mhm.
particularly ladies that would like to lose weight, so weight loss clients. We work on stress first, because it's very difficult to lose weight if you're chronically stressed, because of the stress hormone cortisol. That tends to be a fat storing hormone. So if you're constantly stressed, no matter what you do with your diet, it is quite difficult to lose weight. And I really, I've seen that so many times when these ladies get to grips with their stress and they start eating healthy, that the weight just drops off them. So stress management is really a big thing, and everybody just seems to be chronically stressed these
Yeah.
days, don't they? Everybody.
Mhm. Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point, and I think it's something that we don't think about when we think about health, initially. I do think that the burnout, the chronic stress is becoming more talked about, kind of like menopause is becoming more talked about. But I also think that initially, when we think of being healthy, we think of nutrition, we think of exercise. We're not even thinking about stress. And I don't think people really understand just how detrimental long term chronic stress can be for your health. And like you said, you can eat a perfect diet. And if you're chronically stressed, you still will not feel good. You're
No.
still going to have health issues. I have to think that a lot of this for women is I do feel like with like this generation and the women that are coming to you in that like probably 45 to 55, age range, it's also the generation that is like usually both partners are working. There might be children, but the women are still managing the household, right? They're still managing a lot of those expectations and trying to do it all. And I think we're seeing that while that was glorified for a while, like, we kinda wore that as a badge of honor, like, "Let me handle everything, I've got this," that's really not sustainable, in the long term, if you want to be healthy anyway. So, I think that's a really important subject, or one of the important issue to bring to light, that, like, "Hey, you also have to worry about your stress level." So what are some of the things that you suggest for these ladies in order to help them? Because I think that's another thing, like, we know we're stressed, but we don't even really, you're so overwhelmed, you don't even know where to begin.
No, no, exactly. And the last thing I want to do with a lady that's stressed is start telling them that they need to do all these things like go to yoga and do meditation, because that just causes even more stress.
Right.
So what what I do is I do a stress audit with my clients, and it's actually really beneficial, where we go through and take a day, and tell me what causes you stress. It could be something very minor, like
Mhm.
getting stuck in traffic going to work, or not having enough time to have a healthy breakfast. All of these small things, and then we come up with a plan of how what we can do to help that. And life isn't perfect, is it? I'm not saying that you're going to suddenly be able to do all these magical things, but just minor things. And one thing that is so beneficial and so easy to do is deep breathing, and that you can do it anywhere. And the power of the breath to reset the nervous system is incredible. And I don't know why we don't use that more for stress management, because if you could, sometimes you can feel yourself getting a bit anxious, can't you? So maybe your boss has just said something, or something's happened. If you just take a few like slow, deep breaths, it resets your nervous system and calms everything down. So deep breathing is a very useful tool, because you can actually do it anywhere. And then I try to work with my clients to fit into their daily life. How much time can you give yourself to really focus on stress management, on self-care? And what's worked for some of my clients is to actually schedule it into their agenda, their diary. Otherwise they don't do it.
Mhm.
So even if it's just like 10 minutes, okay, 10 minutes, and now I'm going to go outside and sit outside and drink a cup of coffee, for example. Or
Mhm.
I'm just going to get up in the office and walk up and down the stairs, or go and look out the window. It might sound very minor, but if you add all these things up over the day, it calms you down. What we want to aim for is to reset the nervous system out of that fight and flight mode into the rest, into the parasympathetic nervous system. And then, of course, yoga is brilliant. I mean, if that's your thing and you can do yoga, fantastic. And the same with meditation. But maybe that's not your thing. If you can just sit and read a book, but it's all about taking time out of your day for you to do what makes you feel good.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense, and you bring up a really good point, I think, on, self-care has really become a hot topic, and
Mm.
if we're not careful, I was talking about this with someone the other day, it almost becomes another thing that we're like, "Oh god, didn't do that today." Like, if you immediately take an overwhelmed person and say, "Well, I also need you to go to a yoga class 4 times a week so that you can manage your stress," then that's like one more thing you're stressed about when you didn't check that box. So, what I agree, yoga's great if that's your thing and you can fit that in without it adding to the chaos or the stress. But also, to your point, you can sit in your car, in your bed, at your house and take a couple of deep breaths. And that is a game changer. And it doesn't cost any money and it really doesn't cost that much time. So, start there if nowhere else. But also, like what you're saying, is really just identifying something that brings you a little bit of stillness, a little bit of happiness, whether that's reading, having a cup of coffee by yourself, meditating, yoga, whatever that is for you, and then scheduling it in because I do think as women, we like put ourselves last on the list a lot. So it's the house, the kids, dinner, all the things. And if it's not scheduled in, you get to 8 o'clock at night and you're like, well, I'll do it tomorrow.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And so, okay. So nutrition, stress management. Is there anything else that you focus on, big or small, like kind of pillars that you focus on whenever you're working with ladies in this kind of stage?
Yeah, we do talk about mindset as well, because as we were saying earlier, menopause tends to have this this like negativity attached to it. And it's changing, but not enough. There's still that we think, we can't have children anymore. It's we're aging. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a total natural transition that every woman will go through, but it can be hard for some women. And that mindset piece we work on, really, talking about how do you feel about this time in your life? How does this transition feel for you? Because it's different for every woman. um, and really, framing it in a more positive way. That it's quite interesting, actually, because when you look at research, a lot of cultures in the world where older women are looked up to, and that they're thought of as being these wise leaders in the village, that they're fantastic and everyone goes to them for knowledge. They don't suffer from menopausal symptoms nearly as much as women do in the Western world, where menopause is kind of shrouded with this, dreaded negativity, and women, older women, etc. So it's interesting how strong that mindset piece is, to actually on how we feel as well. Uh, it's a natural phase, and I mean, women, when we come into postmenopause, we're living much longer. It could be like another 30 years of your life. So it's very important that you feel happy during that time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's interesting. I hadn't necessarily heard that, but that makes sense that these women that are still, because I think a lot of it has to do with purpose, like having some purpose. And if your purpose is having, not, I mean, not every, you don't have to have children at all to have a purpose. I'm not insinuating that. But if that is kind of like, you're like, oh, childbearing age, I've had my children, I'm a mom, and then you get, the kids are gone, or that chapter is just closed regardless, and then it becomes like, well, what's my value, what's my purpose? If that's what you've been identifying with, I could see where that would be a struggle. But if you're still regarded as kind of this go-to leader or wise woman, and people still want your advice, like you still feel like you're serving a purpose. And so I could see where that makes sense, that those ladies would be happier and maybe not struggle as much as some of us that are not in that situation. Because I don't
Mm.
think, at least not here in the United States, I don't think they do a good job of it. To me, I feel like it's more societal to say, well, we're done with the women once they hit a certain age. Like you see, I think that's changing, but you see like actresses, celebrities, like that, like there's a shelf life for that, right? And it has to do with age and looks, a lot of it. So that's
Yeah, totally agree with you. It's actually another interesting fact. The only other mammal that goes through menopause is the killer whale. And it's going back to like societies, because when the female, the older female in the pod, go through this transition, she then becomes the leader of the pod of whales, and they, follow her. She knows everything, and she's the wise one that everyone follows. I think I just love that, because I mean
yeah,
that's really how we should be as humans, but we're not, are we?
no,
Really, not yet.
not yet, right? Um, okay, so let's dive in a little bit to what working with you looks like. I mean, you've shared with us what kind of things you focus on. But if someone's listening to this and they think they might be interested in working with you, I know you mentioned one-on-one, you mentioned group. So if you don't mind just kind of talking a little bit about the programs that you offer.
Sure. I have my 21-day reboot and reset program, which I've done many times and it's been very successful. And this is a group program where we have 21 days together. We go through everything, from nutrition, lifestyle, mindset. It's very supportive. You get me 3 times a week on Zoom calls. It's all live. It's a great a community of women, so everybody supports each other. I've got a waiting list for that on my website if anyone's interested in that. And then I do work with clients on a one-to-one basis as well, where we really, tailor everything specifically to your needs. Everything, the my services and everything is on my website if anybody wants to look at that any further. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I like that. I mean, I love one-on-one coaching because it can be really specific and, patient or person specific, but I do think, like, there's a place for group coaching too, and I do like, when you're going through something that kind of feels isolating, sometimes it's nice to be surrounded by other women that are going through it too, because that makes you realize, like, hey, you're not the only one struggling with some of this. And like you said, you see these other women and you're supportive of one another. And some people feel comfortable one on one, and some people like a group.
Mm.
So it's nice to have options too.
Yeah,
Share.
it's lovely to see actually the women in these groups, how wonderful they are towards each other. It really warms my heart how supportive we are, women, to each other. No,
Yeah.
it is, it's lovely to see actually.
Yeah, I bet it is. Um, Okay, would you mind sharing, like, your social media, website, those sorts of things, just so I'll make sure everything's linked in the show notes, but if someone might be listening while they're driving and, your name might stick in their head, but they might not go to the show notes, so
Oh, yeah, my website is Alison, www.alison, that's Alison, Blard. I know that's a funny surname, BLADH.com. On there, you've got all my links to everything, but I am on virtually all social media. You can find me on Instagram at Alison Blard. Uh, you can find me on all the social media. If you just search for Alice and Blood, you'll find me on everything. And I have actually got a lovely meal plan free download for your listeners if anyone's interested. And it's a 7-day menopause reset meal plan. So it gives you all recipes and really what we've been discussing with nutrition to give you ideas of how and what you should be eating. So that I can send you the link to that download if anybody's interested in that. That is actually on my homepage as well of my website.
okay. Yeah, I think that would be great. I'll make sure to get that link from you and make sure it's in the show notes, and then, like you said, if listeners go to your website, they can find it there as well. But any last, I guess, parting words or advice, or maybe something we didn't touch on that you think is important for the listeners to hear?
I think the one thing we haven't touched on is movement.
Mm,
Uh, and just briefly, I would say that we need as women when we age. I mean, obviously, we need to exercise is key for everybody, but it
mm,
really becomes very important for women when we come into menopause, and in particular, lifting things. Doing strength training because one, our bones can become weaker due to the lack of hormones. We're more vulnerable for osteoporosis, and two, we lose our muscle mass. So it's very important that you lift things. And that doesn't mean that you have to spend hours in the gym, but just do some sort of resistance training
mm.
um, at least 2 to 3 times a week. If you've not done it before, obviously take it easy. Maybe start with once a week, but it's very, very important for your long-term health.
Yeah, I agree. I've read a lot about that and how important it becomes to kind of switch the mindset from cardio driven workout or, high
Mm.
intensity workouts to, which I'm not saying you can't do that, but that does spike cortisol over time,
Yes.
the stress hormone we were talking about, but like really focusing on strength training. Because to your point, as we get older, our bones become more fragile, our muscle mass is becoming less. And so I think that I agree. I've read a lot about that. And that's definitely been a goal of mine, for 2025, is to try to focus more on strength training and less on the other stuff. We'll see.
Yes. We want our muscles. Muscles are the organ of longevity. We really, really need our muscles, and you see that in people that are older. The people that have managed to maintain their muscle mass are much more mobile and fitter, and
Mhm.
can live a full life. So get lifting.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. Good lifting. Well, thank you so much, for joining me today, Allison. It's been a pleasure. I know I've learned a lot, and we'll take some of this away, and I'm sure the listeners will as well. All right, you still there? It kind of times out when I quit recording there for a second.
Yeah, I'm still here. I know you froze them for a bit, but I think
Yeah.
it was.
It was right at the end, so that's good.
Yeah.